Bam! A hard push on my back sent me crashing to the floor of the shed. You cheeky wife, cool your head down there. The floor felt cool. The steel figurines were cold from the night air. It was hard on my bare feet. I turned around to see my mother-in-law looking down at me. Her eyes were colder than the midwinter air. She didn't see me as a person, despite being a wife. How dare you sneak out of the house just because you can't stand my guidance? Don't be so selfish after being married once. I've reached my limit, Mother. I spend every waking moment doing the housework. Yet every day you bully me, I'm going crazy with stress. Don't be weak. You're just not doing the duty as a wife. As she said that, my mother-in-law took the smartphone out of my hand. Ah, well, you'll just have to sit there and reflect for a while. It's going to be cold tonight, but if you don't get hurt a little bit, you're not going to understand, right? Don't do it, Evelyn. If you lock me in a shed in the middle of the winter like this, I'd... Oh, by the way, you're a sickly one, aren't you? You think you'll make it till morning? Wait for the sun to rise, okay? Evelyn! Ignoring my protest, she slammed the storage door behind her. While I was still clinging to the door, I could hear the sound of a heavy padlock being locked. I heard my mother-in-law's footsteps walking away. I crumbled to the floor again. How cold. My mother-in-law's treatment of me was even more chilling than the cold feeling on my bare feet. And although she had always been a bully to me, I, who had a chronic bronchial disease, could not bear the thought of her going this far. I repeatedly coughed. I didn't think I'd make it to the morning. I might lose consciousness at this point. How could I have let this happen to me? I was choking on my own tears, and my groaning was almost inaudible. At that moment, Are you all right? The sound of banging on the door of the storeroom was a familiar voice to me. On the other side of the door, there seems to be someone struggling to unlock it, and in my mind's eye, I was replaying my encounter with that person in the fading scenery. I'm an ordinary full-time worker. I became a housewife at the age of 38. It's my first marriage, but I met my now husband relatively late. I spent my 20s taking care of my parents. By the time I took care of my father and mother, I was long past my mid-30s. I was working as a clerical worker for a small printing company, and I was managing to make ends meet. I felt like a weight had finally been lifted off my shoulders, but all that I, person in her 30s, had left was time alone without my family. How empty. In the midst of my daily depression, Joshua, the man who would become my husband, approached me. Would you like to have dinner with me? He was a salesman for one of my clients, so he was in and out of my office frequently. Apparently, that's where he first met me. He was 36 years old at the time. He said he wasn't as strong as he was when he was younger, but from my point of view, I found him to be a very energetic and attractive man, especially since I had a chronic disease of the trachea and I was not a very active person. Maybe that's why my husband seemed more energetic to me. After 6 months of dating, we decided to make it official. When my husband proposed to me, saying, "It's time for me to get serious about my life," I said yes without hesitation. I think things were going well right from the start. He was kind to me. He allowed me to be a stay-at-home housewife because of my chronic illness. I'm fine as long as I get to drink the soup you make. My husband was not a very particular person. Except for his work, he had no hobbies or interests that would keep him out of the house. After we married, he got a promotion. He was disappointed that he had to travel a lot and work overtime. In our smooth-sailing marriage, there was only one problem: my mother-in-law. After our marriage, we moved in with my husband's parent. My husband's father passed away early in his life. He thought he could not leave his mother living alone. I was not opposed to moving in with my mother-in-law, and I wanted to be close to her because she had already lost her parents. I thought it would be good if the three of us could get along well with each other. That's what I thought. But... Jody, do you even know what it's like to be a wife? During the daytime, when my husband was at work, my mother-in-law said that coldly to me after I finished cleaning the living room. To be a wife? That's right. If you had such a mindset, you would not have done such a messy way of cleaning. I'm doing the best I can, though. It doesn't matter what you think. You're not related to me. Do you think you have that right? As a servant of this house, you are obligated to work like a cart horse. My mother-in-law was very harsh with me in this manner. She's a woman who usually gives an impression of meekness. At our pre-marriage meeting, she was just smiling at me, but when I entered the family, her attitude toward me was a little too much. It's no surprise that she puts all the housework on me, and if she doesn't like the food, she makes me cook it over, again and again. She makes me clean the same places over and over again, day after day. Especially bad was running errands by going to the Hanas. Whenever my mother-in-law didn't like something in the Hana hood, she would immediately send me to complain about it. "Oh, the Hana's baby is being so noisy today. How long are they going to let him cry at night? You go and warn them, Jody." But Mother, the couple next door is still young, and the wife seems to be having a hard time raising their child. "We don't care about that. Are you saying that just because they are young, they are allowed to do whatever they want? Just go and shut the baby up. If I have to listen to that baby's noisy cries any longer, I'll lose my mind." Yes. Reluctantly, I had no choice but to visit my Hana's house. I pressed the intercom. A tired-looking woman answered the door. She was carrying a squirming baby on her chest. "I'm sorry. It's about the baby's cries, right?" Before I could say anything else, the woman bowed her head apologetically. I couldn't even say no. I had no choice but to listen to her. "I'm trying to be careful, but this baby, when he gets anxious, he can't stop crying." It's okay. I'm not here to complain. It seems it's tough for you to take care of him by yourself. I know how hard it is to be on your own. Have you raised children before? No, I took care of my parents. I had no siblings, so I took care of them all by myself. That must have been really hard on you. So, I know how hard it is for you. You're lonely, right? You think you can't count on anyone, right? Especially when you're home alone? My husband is too busy with work right now. As I said this, the woman burst into tears. I was surprised, but in the next moment, I involuntarily held up my hand. I touched the woman who looked like she was about to collapse, and said in the gentlest voice possible, "It's okay. This won't go on forever. Since he's a baby, it's just for now. I'm here to help you when you need it. As a neighbor. Don't hesitate to ask." "Okay. Thank you," she replied with a shrug. Finally, the woman seemed to calm down. I went back to the house and made small talk with my mother-in-law. I couldn't say I felt sorry for the woman next door, so I explained to her that I had warned her as I was told. If I am sent to complain again in the future, I'll just help my neighbor out. In fact, many times after that, I became closer and closer to the woman next door and her baby. As a result, the baby cried less and less. However, my mother-in-law's harassment of me did not change. No, it got worse day by day. My husband's work got busier by the day, and she took advantage of his absence. My mother-in-law began to treat me like a servant. I was a slave to her demands 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Due to the irregularity of her demands, I could not sleep well. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I decided to leave my mother-in-law's house. If I continued to stay in this house, I was going to lose my mind. In fact, my trachea was in bad shape. I wanted to get away from my mother-in-law as soon as possible, if not forever. At least until I felt better. I need to take shelter somewhere. When my husband left for a long business trip, I started to prepare for a night escape. On the day of my escape, I saw him off on his business trip. I went about my business as usual. I did what my mother-in-law ordered me to do. As much as possible, I tried to move as usual so that my mother-in-law would not notice. But I think my mother-in-law somehow noticed somewhere. Just as I was about to take my belongings out of the house, my mother-in-law stormed into my room. She had a wry smile on her face. "You're just trying to get away from me, huh? That's not going to happen. You have your duties as a servant." "I can't stand it any longer, Mother. I won't stay forever. At least a month, or even half a month. Let me rest elsewhere."
"Don't say such a silly thing."
You didn't tell Joshua that, did you? I don't want him to be bothered with me. It's an important time for him at work, too. I hadn't discussed a single thing with my husband about this. As I said, one reason is that I don't want to bother my husband, but the other reason is that I wanted to let him know about my disappearance. While I was being harassed by my mother-in-law, he didn't notice a single thing about my distress. I tried my best to hide some of it from him. But still, as a married couple, I wanted him to be aware that his wife was in danger. If I had to run away in the night, my husband would understand that I was not in a normal state. So today's escape was completely my own decision.
I knew you were a bad wife, but I didn't expect you to be this bad. Are you going to run away from this house and live with another man? How dare you?
No, that's not it. I just couldn't stand your bullying.
Don't talk like that. What bullying? I'm just educating you as a mother-in-law. That's why you're a parentless daughter.
I can't believe you brought up my parents. I can't stand it. No matter what you say, I will leave this house. For now, I tried to take whatever I can to get my hands on, pushed my mother-in-law out of my way, and ran out of the room. But the moment I tried to push her away, I felt a pain in my chest. I felt as if I was choking. I almost collapsed on the spot. I knew my chronic illness was getting worse. But just as I thought that, my mother-in-law grabbed me by the arm and dragged me out of the room. What? I was startled. I found myself in the garden. The night air tingled on my skin. She pushed me off the porch. I wasn't even allowed to put on my shoes.
Come here.
I was forcibly led away. She took me to a shed in the yard and shoved me straight into the shed. The shed, which was usually full of tools for tinkering in the garden, was filled with an earthly smell.
You'll have to reflect in here for a while.
In here?
You disobeyed me, didn't you? A servant has to know her place. Fortunately, Joshua is going on a business trip and won't be home for a while. I don't have to worry about anyone looking in on me. You can stay here for a few days and cool off.
Wait a minute, I'm sick.
I'm sure your body will respond well to the cold weather these days. It's a nice feeling.
And with that, my mother-in-law closed the far door of the storage room with great force. While I hung on the door, I heard the sound of a heavy lock slamming shut with a clank. My mother-in-law really wants to lock me in here. Evelyn! Evelyn! I repeatedly banged on the door and yelled, but soon my chest began to ache. It was hard to breathe. It was cold. In addition, the earthly smell of the shed hurt my throat. If I don't do something, I'm really going to collapse here. If I lose consciousness, I'm finished. I'm so cold and dusty. I would never wake up again. Help me. I managed to squeeze that out. I slammed my hand against the door with all my might, but my energy would soon run out. I'm truly helpless. If I obeyed my mother-in-law, I would never live. Are you all right? I heard a voice just before I lost consciousness. When I looked up, I heard a familiar voice knocking on the other side of the door. With the last of my strength, I called out to the door. Help me. It was you after all. It's me, your neighbor, Hannah. Thanks for all your help with the baby. The woman was the young mom next door. My mother-in-law had said so noisy crying at night and made me go to the neighbor's house to complain to her. But actually, I had already helped her to take care of her child many times under the pretext of going there to warn her. Now my husband lives with us. I was worried about you. But why did you... There was a lot of noise outside. My husband and I were checking out what's going on. Then we saw you being shoved in the shed. We were so surprised. The shed was locked, though.
I'll see if I can get it open, but this padlock is very strong.
It seems that Hannah's husband was pulling the lock with all his might. But that didn't help with the metal lock. He said he would get some pliers and left a bit. And that's when all hell started to break loose. Although he brought the pliers, it was still no match for the padlock. The couple even brought out a hammer and saw. Even so, they didn't leave it to chance. The noise seemed to attract people from the neighborhood one after another. Finally, someone seemed to have called the police, and even the sound of the police sirens could be heard. Finally, my mother-in-law noticed the commotion in the yard and came back. There she met the police officer who had arrived at the scene. My mother-in-law was making some sort of lame excuse. Finally, the policeman said, "Bring me the key to the padlock." She then rushed back to get the key. I was released from the storeroom about 30 minutes after I was locked in. After a long night, I was in a daze and was carried straight to the hospital. By the next day, I was conscious, but the condition of my trachea was still unpredictable. So I was to stay in the hospital for a week for rest and recuperation. As for my mother-in-law, she was taken away by the police officer who came to the scene. She was taken to the police station for further questioning, where she was scolded extensively.
I didn't do anything!
At first, my mother-in-law was refusing to tell the truth. But Hannah and Nick recorded the whole thing on their smartphone, and so all of my mother-in-law's deeds became clear. In the recording, you could clearly see my mother-in-law pushing me into a storage room and padlocking the door. I couldn't thank the couple enough for coming up with the idea to record it. It must have been a great crime, but when the police asked, "Do you want to report it?" I shook my head. I didn't want to make a big deal out of it. Above all, when my husband found out what had happened, he promised to remove my mother-in-law from the house.
I'm sorry I didn't see it before.
After visiting me in the hospital room, he got down on his knees and apologized. My husband's pale expression made me feel afraid of him. In my stubbornness, it was my fault for not discussing it with him. We agreed to communicate well as a couple from now on, and so the problem between us was settled. When my mother-in-law was evicted from the house, she had no choice but to move to a cramped apartment by herself. She has no friends to visit her there, and she is living on her late husband's pension. She contacted me several times to apologize. I firmly refused her apology. I gave her an ultimatum that if she contacts me again, I told her that I'd talk to the police. I don't want anything to do with her anymore. I have a good relationship with the couple who helped me. It seems that their child will be starting kindergarten soon. I'm going to pop in and give my noisy neighbor a gift to celebrate his having started kindergarten.